Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the Lighting Manager's Dilemma. We're very excited to bring this webinar to you, and there are a lot of things to cover today. Before we get into it, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming from the traditional lands of the Darug Nation in Western Sydney. I know that many of you are coming from different parts of our magnificent country, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional elders, past, present, and emerging from here and from all the lands that you come from as well. G'day, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I am Paul Brown, the Managing Director at Ironbark. We have on hand Ross McCurdy from our team and Charlotte Summers, who'll be doing a lot of the back-end support, putting things in the chat, that kind of stuff. We also have the excellent Simone Bright, who will be presenting on the work she's doing within the Sunshine Coast. At last count, we had 129, I think Charlotte said, registrations. So there's a lot of familiar faces, but also a lot of new people. It's great to see you all here and welcome to the session. Before we jump into it, I do want to talk a little bit about our journey to this point. We have at Ironbark around 40 staff that supports councils and communities to become more sustainable, and we've been doing that for the past 20 years. Our core areas are climate strategies and counting emissions for councils and businesses, but a really big part of what we've been doing is in lighting. We work closely with councils, distribution businesses, main roads authorities, and product manufacturers to understand and deliver projects on the ground, large-scale projects and small, to implement lighting projects. And within every project that we do, we think about what sustainability looks like. Over time, this has changed. Over the past 15 to 20 years, a really big focus has been energy and emissions, and we're going to talk about a number of other areas that we have been doing work on with our customers, councils, communities, and what the focus of a lot of councils now are beyond energy. All right, so for today, we have some fairly basic housekeeping. We're going to jump into the Lighting Manager's Dilemma, which is one of my favorite topics, and then talk about the color of lighting and a few case studies. This session is not going to provide all the information you need or all the information we have to give you. And I'll talk a little bit about some other goodies that we'll be providing. Bit of housekeeping first. If you can mute yourself, we do have speakers coming through. Obviously, don't mute yourself while you're speaking. In addition, if you can please make your video screen seen. It's always much nicer to see people's faces, especially when you're putting things in the chat. We can understand who you are and what you look like and what you're doing. So please put your video on. And if you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat. Try and make the questions as clear as possible and succinct. Noting we do have a lot of questions from the registrations before the session, and a lot of the answers to those questions are either integrated into this webinar or some of the other resources that we've put together. Overall, the session's reasonably casual. It's designed to talk, discuss, and help. At the end of the session, we can go to as long as half past the hour, wherever the hour is that you're coming from, so that we can answer all the questions. If we don't get to all of the questions, we will respond on email after the session. All right. We want to talk firstly about what is happening in our world. Selena, I'm just checking whether you're on the call.
I am.
Excellent. I'd
Hello.
like to hand over to Selena Griffith, who is the chair of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, about an excellent conference that's coming up next year, which we are part of and excited to be. Selena, tell us about it. What's happening?
Well, we've got a conference coming up in Melbourne next year from the 19th to the 21st of March, where we will have a whole series of activities, including experts, industry, business people, hopefully councils, and people informing policy and developing policy around reducing light pollution. And we have an early bird discount, which has just expired, but we will extend it for you guys if you haven't already booked in. We have a series of panels and papers being presented over the day. Arup is doing a walk around the city experience with us to look at best practice examples of lighting. And on the last day, on the 21st of March, I'm hosting a symposium where we're working towards creating a white paper on best practice to share with everyone. And we would love to have any or all of you involved in the discussions that we're having at that time. We have informed a number of federal policies on light pollution through this process in the past, and I think it's important for the community to be part of that moving into the future as well. Some of you might already be using some of that material in your daily professional lives. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I would love to meet you in person in Melbourne.
Thanks, Selena. We'll probably, if you can stay on to the end of the session,
Sure.
and we'll group all the questions and field them as we get to that end.
Great, thank you.
Got on you. Thanks, Selena. And we will be there on the last day working with ADSA on a Dark Sky Hacks for Council workshop. And excited to do that. A lot of what we talk about today is a bit of a warm-up to that session. And in the session itself, it will be face-to-face, and you'll be able to get into more depth and talk about specific things that are relevant to you there. All right. The other thing that's going on in our world is that this webinar is one of three things that we're doing at the moment to expand and discuss what sustainable lighting, outdoor lighting for local governments looks like. The first is a series of articles. Many of you may have seen the first two of those articles. There's another three coming. Second is this webinar, and then the third is the white paper. In the white paper, there will be a lot more detail on some of the things that we touch on today. An hour or less to talk about things is never enough. So we have gone through and expanded, expounded, and got excited about lighting and what sustainable lighting looks like. All right, what about you? We have an excellent spread of councils and stakeholders from around the country, as you can see here. There is one person from the international world. I'm not exactly sure where you're from, but welcome. We also asked in the registration, who knows who Ellen is? About half of you knew who Ellen was, and the rest was kind of maybe, is this guy? Is he Steve? Nonetheless, we're expecting a mix of skills and knowledge. So this presentation is designed to talk to both all levels of skill and knowledge. You're definitely not out of place if you're not sure who Ellen is. Spoiler alert, Ellen is artificial light at night, which is the big kahuna we're talking about today. What are you doing about Ellen? Are you planning to respond to the impacts of Ellen or deliver smart lighting projects in your municipality over the next couple of years? We did find there was a really big mix here. So a lot of you said that you were considering it. There was another big mix of people who weren't sure what you're doing about it. And then there was a smaller mix of people who were saying, yes, we're doing it. And when I say doing it, the majority of you said we are going to be doing smart lighting as opposed to Ellen. There was some focus on Ellen, but it was more using smart lighting to deliver outcomes, including to improve the impacts of artificial light at night. All right, so that's a bit about you. What is the lighting manager's dilemma? It is two things. Firstly, it's managing community need. So what is the amenity the lighting is provided to our communities at night? What are the safety benefits from that lighting? And comparing that to the cost and sustainability impacts. This is the ongoing dilemma. It's the same dilemma we faced 20 years ago. Over time, lighting managers are getting more and more sophisticated, both in their understanding of the balance of these things and also in the tools that they can use to manage the dilemma. Today is all about the compromises that councils, lighting managers need to make and can make to get a good balance of these different things. All right, let's talk a little bit about these impacts. So in terms of the dark side of lighting, this cool little critter here is the Tamar wallaby. Around 70% of Australian mammals are nocturnal and 60% of insects. Any lighting at night has an impact on animals. For the Tamar wallaby, reproduction is directly impacted. It's delayed from artificial light at night, and that leads to impacts and direct impacts on the Tamar wallaby. Obviously, different species and different creatures have differing impacts. I'll talk a little bit later about another creature, but this is one of the things, particularly for critical habitats and species, that we need to consider. Money. Lighting costs money. We all know this, lighting managers, this is one of the core things we're managing. Fluctuating energy bills, energy efficiency is a great thing to reduce costs in lighting, but then increasing cost for things like smart lighting we're looking at what's the balance here of cost versus amenity, how we're delivering our service. Human health is one where there's been a lot of information around lighting. Generally speaking, lighting at night is bad for us, especially within a couple of hours of going to sleep. It suppresses melatonin, which is one of the key hormones that help us sleep well and therefore be happy. It can be particularly impactful for outdoor lighting, for high impact lighting like sports lighting and advertising. On the flip side, a well-designed roadway lighting scheme has been studied to have very low or no impacts on melatonin. So for some of the lighting that councils are responsible for, if you do it well, it starts to address these and deal with human health impacts. Colour is important. So for the two on the left and the right, humans and animals, we are animals. Which colour the light does have a big impact on different species. In this colour chart here, there are numbers. So on the far left, it's 1,000. On the far right, it's 12,000 below the lights. As you can see, the red orange is at 1,000. Towards the top end of the spectrum is blue light. So we often talk about orange and blue light. Daylight is in the middle there, so at 4,000 Kelvin, so colour temperature. So we'll talk a lot more about this later, but colour temperature is really impactful. And generally speaking, warmer lights have less impact than cooler lights. Let's talk about the light too. Why do we have lighting? Well, we have lighting because we want to activate our cities. We want people to be going to night markets. We want our festivals to be well attended. We want our communities to be socially, emotionally, and mentally engaged with each other. So having night events is a really important part of that, and lighting is a critical part of that as well. We also want to provide opportunities to people to physically run about. For health, being physically active is really important, and more councils are being asked to provide lighting services at night for physical activity, and this is a good thing. And of course, road safety. Lighting is shown to reduce accidents by around 30% on roads. And so it's a really large part of our overall lighting. It's around about 90% of the outdoor lights that councils manage are in roadways. All right, so let's talk about solving the dilemma. We talked about this balance between the light and the dark. I am not going to tell you all the things about solving the dilemma today because we don't have time. But at the end of this, we will be giving you the white paper. So in that, there's a lot more detail than we will have time to talk about today. But I will give you a bit of a sneak peek, and the case studies that we will be talking about shortly will be a critical part of helping work this through too. So what are some of the core projects that help you to deal with and manage the lighting manager's dilemma? The first one is policy. So policy and guidelines are possibly the most important step a local government can do in ensuring that what gets implemented, what gets installed, what projects you deliver, what developers install, meet and match the dilemma. That's because in a lighting policy, you can be general. You can say, this is the color temperature for this road that we will accept. You can also be specific. So you can, in a particular area of high biodiversity value where you know there are an endangered species there, you can make a different decision. You can say the color temperature here is this, or in fact, we will not light this area. So a lighting policy is a really critical step for all local governments to manage and deliver this. The second thing is the technology that you are using. As shown earlier, a lot of you are considering using smart lighting. Smart lighting is a great tool to reduce overall lighting to meet compliance, but not exceed compliance. Importantly, you don't want technology everywhere. And this is balancing the cost side of the equation. We'll talk a little bit more about where you don't include smart lighting later, but there's quite a lot of it in the white paper, which we'll link to you. The third core project is bulk replacement, bulk street lighting and outdoor lighting replacement programs. If you are putting LEDs in all of your streets, as mentioned earlier, that is 90% of your lights. By implementing those projects effectively, designing them properly, taking a little bit of time in the scoping at the start, the impact is profound on how you are managing the lighting manager's dilemma. Just to give you a little sense though, so when you replace a residential streetlight, an old technology, to an LED, you are reducing the light output by about half, a bit more than half. So how can you do that and still be compliant? Well, the old technology used to shoot about 10% of the light up into the air. And around 40 to 50% of the light used to be pulled directly under the luminaire and not spread evenly and consistently along the road. So that's why you can use half the light now, because the LEDs are much, much better designed to put the light where it needs to go. At the same time, you're minimizing spill light and you're significantly improving the energy efficiency. Last thing I did want to mention is community voice. We'll hear from Simone a little later on her work in the Sunshine Coast, but having processes to talk to, listen to, and respond to community is really critical part of ensuring the lighting is going where it's needed and not where it's not needed. All right, so that gives you a little sense of solving the dilemma. I also want to talk about something super fun, which is the color of safety. I mentioned earlier that blue light is worse than other colors in general, in most situations, not always. I want to go a little bit deeper here. Ross, who we'll be talking a bit later, has done some excellent analysis of safety for us. These links here are just to show that this is a fairly deep analysis. It's taken us about 7 years to get to this point to be able to make some quite specific recommendations on color temperature for road lighting. All right, let's go straight into it. So what we are recommending is 4,000 K, but not higher for high volume roads. Typically over 80 kilometers an hour, and this can also include key precincts and sports lighting. Often sports lighting requires this, but sometimes it's silent, and often it says between 4 and 6,000 K. So there is certainly no reason not to limit the blue end of the spectrum. As I mentioned earlier, that the blue end has higher impacts than the warmer end. We would recommend lower than 3,000 K for high biodiversity value areas and preferably no lighting at all. However, for road lighting, we wouldn't recommend lower than 2,500 K unless you are derating the light, and particularly in residential areas. So derating means you need to put more lumens out there. And the reason for that is that at the warmer end of the spectrum, from a safety perspective, it takes people longer to stop. So there are risks to road safety when you're heading into the warmer end of the spectrum. And then 3,000 K for everywhere else. So the reality is most of the lights that councils manage will be 3,000 K, or we are recommending they should be 3,000 K. A few other bits and pieces. This is for lighting nerds out there. You should also be looking at a color rendering index, which is whether the light source can faithfully compare to the natural light source of 70 or higher. So that means when you walk down the street and someone has a red jumper on, you will see a red jumper. And the last one is a scotopic photopic ratio of greater than 1 for residential areas. This just reflects on and tells you that when the human eye is under low light conditions, you need to consider this ratio, which is for residential streetlights. All right, that's it. I do want to give one last little example before I hand across to Ross. We've talked about blue light and orange light. This is not always the case. In this example here, we have an awesome, beautiful Maori wrasse fish, which is endangered. It lives from Port Hedland, or just north of Port Hedland, to around Tweed Heads in our coastal coral areas. And the graph on the left shows the penetration of light in deep ocean on the left, and then in coastal waters on the right. As you can see from the right-hand colour, a lot of the colour of light that is in coastal waters is in the green and the yellow end of the spectrum. So for a Maori wrasse, it's important to limit lighting to them, not just the blue end of the spectrum. And so, again, this is just highlighting when you have critical species, they deserve a local action plan. When we're doing bulk street lighting upgrades, we are considering these sorts of species and where they are within a municipality. All right, I'm now going to hand across to Ross McCurdy. He is one of Ironbark's most senior project managers. He project managed an awesome and interesting project at the city of Parramatta. And he is not only a project manager, but he helped me put together most of the content for the Colour of Safety section. He's a lighting nerd after my own heart. Ross, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'll do the talking for this next few minutes, but Paul will keep navigating the slides. So I'll just be saying, Paul, next slide, please. But I'm going to talk about City of Parramatta. We've been working with Parramatta and Endeavour Energy since around 2015 on street lighting upgrades. In the beginning, this was just a basic energy efficiency project, mainly the installation of LEDs, replacing old inefficient lighting on minor roads or residential streets. But in 2021, as the focus shifted to major roads, it evolved into a smart lighting project, which is what I'm going to talk about. So we've now reached the point where Parramatta has around about 4,500 smart connected major road lights installed and commissioned and programmed across their council area. Next slide, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to talk through a couple of key parts of the process, the smart lighting process and the system, but I'll start with the design process, because this is probably where there's most interest and where we get most questions. So we undertook a smart light by light design analysis. So that's an important point. It's going light by light, looking at each street light in isolation in its own context. And considered we'll start in the top left of the slide here with those first 4 dot points. So considered compliance with Australian standards, so AS 1158. It took into account analysis of traffic accident data. It looked at light spill into environmentally sensitive areas or areas of biodiversity, and also took into account council's broader strategic transport and safety objectives. The final design used all of that information to specify and implement constant light output, or CLO, which is something Paul, I think, is going to mention later in the presentation as well. But constant light output only if the original light before any programming was found to be compliant. So that's an important point. So CLO was the first one. Then trimming, which is the removal of overlighting. So adjusting down the output of the light to only meet the lighting standard that is required and not more. Off-peak dimming. For the most part, that meant from category V3 lighting down to V5. And then also site-specific glare shielding, so especially around those areas, identified areas of biodiversity. So just focusing in on the dimming aspect there, when to dim and how much to dim was based on a detailed assessment of a couple of things, the road classification and traffic volumes throughout the day. And both of those were based on council data sets. As well as review of traffic accident data, which I think was a state government, New South Wales state government data source. So as I said before, for most part, the dimming settings involve going from V3 down to V5. I might get you to jump back to the previous slide, Paul, because I'll just talk to some of those images before we move on. For the most part, the dimming settings were V3 to V5, but interestingly, there were a number of lights that were set at V5, but then dimmed to PR3. So they're going down a full lighting category from category V to category P, which on the face of it seems quite odd. But that was as a result of, during the design process, council identified that a number of roads were over-designed. So the original installation should have been designed to category P or residential light levels, but they weren't. They were over-designed to category B. So they took the decision to leave them at that over-designed category B in peak hours, but then dim them down to the level that they should have been designed to in off-peak hours. So that was quite an interesting, good pickup as part of the design process. I'll just quickly finish off on this slide with these images. There, the ones you can see are from Opticity, which is a customer lighting insights portal or a clip, which is an end user interface piece of software which was used to support the design process, and council now uses to manage the lights. So the three images you can see here show how compliance information is visualized firstly. So that's the top left image. So that's visualizing the trimming and the dimming settings for each individual light. And then it also shows in the other two images the overlay of traffic accident data and environmentally sensitive sites as two other examples, both of which helped inform council decisions about where to dim, how much to dim, where not to dim, and where perhaps to install glare shielding because there were concerns about light spill. Okay, next one. Thanks, Paul. So that was the design process. Now, the smart lighting system that was deployed by both Council and Endeavour has the following key components. So I'm going to start from right to left here on the screen. Got the light point controller, or the smart node, is the communications device that plugs into the light. That then communicates wirelessly over a communications network and connects to the street lighting central management system, or street lighting software that allows you to do all those things that I talked about before, the dimming and the trimming and the CLO. So that those three things, the node or the controller, the network plus the CMS, are the three critical components of what we call the back end system. And then the last component is the clip, the customer lighting insights portal, in this case, Opticity. And as I said, that's sort of the front end interface, which is used to streamline the design and the commissioning and the management of the street lights. So that's the whole system. Okay, so what did the project achieve? So once up and running, these were some of the key outcomes. There's roughly 40% additional energy and greenhouse gas savings. That's on top of the base savings from the base LED upgrade. Expected cost savings of around $7 million over the 20-year expected life of these assets. Roughly 3,500 tonnes of CO2 equivalent annual greenhouse gas savings on average. Reduced impacts of artificial lighting at night on some at-risk species. So the two examples you can see here on screen were given special consideration. So the grey-headed flying fox, which is known to hang out in Parramatta and is listed as vulnerable, and then the bogong moth, which is listed as endangered. So Parramatta, the city of Parramatta, sits smack bang in the middle of the bogong moth's migratory pathway. So it was because of these species and others that glare shielding was put in around specific sites. So other benefits: improved compliance, and linked to that, reduced accident risk because of the improved compliance. Overlighting was removed from around 64% of the lights. So that was the trimming. So 64% of lights were delivering more light than they needed to hit the required standard. And then finally, a great outcome was rapid complaint resolution. So an example of that was shortly after the LED installation was complete and those lights programmed, council got a complaint from a resident in a particular street complaining that the light levels were actually a little too dim. So we're able to quickly jump back in using the system and reduce the amount of dimming and trimming on those lights and bring it back up slightly. So all of those things combined, great project. Well done, City of Parramatta. It's a leading project, a great example of how to do smarts and how to do it well. I'll finish off my part of the presentation just by talking through a really neat use case for smart lighting. So at the end of October, just gone, Parramatta Lanes Festival was on. This was run over 4 nights. It had loads of food stalls, live music, light installations, a whole other bunch of activities. It was spread across across and around the Parramatta CBD. in one closed off section of George Street, so closed off, this is right in the middle of the CBD, and this was especially for the festival. That section of George Street, council wanted to switch the street lighting off completely to enhance the festival lighting. So there was 5 lights, which were all LEDs, equipped with smart nodes, and we were able to jump in through the system and quickly and easily switch them off using the controls during festival hours. So this was a really cheap and easy way of switching the lights off, which otherwise would have cost council in the order of tens of thousands of dollars to get Endeavour Energy to roll a truck every night of the festival to disconnect and then reconnect the lights once the festival had finished. So that's just a really good example of a benefit of smart lighting. And to finish off, here's a before and then an after shot of the effect of being able to turn those street lights off, really enhance the festival lighting. So that was a really cool little project that popped up that we weren't expecting, but we expect we'll do it again next year when the festival's back on, and perhaps for other events and other sites for different reasons. But that's everything. So thanks, Paul. I'll throw back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. And feel free to pop in the chat any specific questions you have. Ross will be sticking around to the end of the session as well. I do want to throw now to Simone Wright, which has got an excellent name for this session, who is the Senior Policy and Research Officer at Sunshine Coast Council. Simone has been working at local government for over 20 years and specialises in project management, policy development, research, strategic advice and advocacy. And as part of this work, she's led a whole range of different projects, particularly in the areas of environment and sustainability, and is currently leading Sunshine Coast Council's proposal to establish a dark sky reserve in the hinterland. So very excited to hear from you, Simone. I will pass over to you now. Yes, Simone, are you there? I can see that Simone is not currently there. Charlotte, can I hand over to you just to check whether Simone's around? And in the meantime, I'm just going to quickly flip through to the next stage of the presentation.
I can see Simone. She just popped in.
Hello, Simone. Can you hear us?
Oh, you're on mute, Simone.
Okay, I might leave. Charlotte, can you talk to Simone and just make sure we can get her on the audio? In the meantime, we're going to jump through to the next section of the presentation, and we'll come back to Simone when her audio is working. All right, the third case study, now the second, that we wanted to talk through is a smart lighting design study that we have been implementing in the Ausgrid and Endeavour regions around Sydney over the past 3 years. So we are often asked to go deeper in these webinars and often have to skim. So today we're going a little deeper than we usually do. And this is some of the specific lessons for how to integrate smart lighting design into a major road project. All right, so what did we do? First, we looked at around 4,500 smart connected major road lights in those 2 distribution regions and controlled them. And the purpose of the study was to understand what are the different options we have from a design perspective and what are the implications for both compliance and safety risk, and doing an analysis of energy and cost impacts as well. Firstly, design options. As Ross mentioned, we looked at trimming. Trimming is really just bringing the design into compliance. So without trimming, I think Ross mentioned 60+% of lights in that Parramatta example were over lighting. They were putting more light in than compliance required. That was part of it. Dimming is the other part. Dimming is when at a certain time of night you are moving from one level to another and reducing the light output, still to meet the Australian standards for compliance. Interestingly, in this study, we found that trimming was by far the higher energy saving opportunity than dimming. So, for example, in some areas you can't, main roads authorities do not allow dimming, but trimming is a significant opportunity by itself. Lastly, constant light output, Ross mentioned as well, essentially makes the light output consistent over time. Without constant light output, you are brighter in the first year than you need to be compliant. And the other thing is people in place. Every single system design project should consider people in place. For the purpose of this analysis here, I'm not going to talk about that though. I'm really talking about those other three elements. All right, so what was the design assessment? What were the options that we looked at? Firstly, what is it? What are the options? What are the impact without smart control as a baseline? Then we looked at smart design, including both trimming and CLO, and then one that included the dimming as well. And then the last one was bulk dimming. So bulk dimming is very common, particularly in Europe, and it's essentially a citywide or a region-wide. We will reduce emissions or reduce energy by a certain amount or light output by a certain amount. So for the purpose of this assessment, we looked at bulk dimming to 75% and then bulk dimming to 50% of output. And that constant light output on all lights. As mentioned, this is common overseas and is in discussion in Australia as well. So it's a real consideration whether we do this or not. Importantly, for the smart design, we did not include, we only applied this if it didn't reduce the compliance levels. All right, so 4,500 lights. These were all major roads. What happened? What did we find? First, from a compliance perspective, we found that the LED only and all of the smart design do not impact on compliance. So compliance is not reduced. In this example here, you can see there's around a third that are non-compliant. This is very common in Australian cities to have a certain amount of non-compliance. If we added a row up the top, which was old technology, it would be worse than the LED only replacement. And that is also consistent when moving to an LED installation, you generally improve compliance levels. And that's certainly what we will integrate as well. In terms of a bulk dimming, you start to see that compliance worsening. By the time you get to 50% output, it's around about a bit more than 2/3 non-compliant, which is obviously very alarming and problematic for road safety. In terms of energy, this graph is what is the energy levels. Obviously, the LED only has more energy than any of the design options. We found that the smart trimming and dimming and bulk dimming to 25% output were all within the ballpark of each other. So there is some variance within those numbers, but overall there's a fairly significant between 25 and 40% reduction in energy consumption from some level of design. Obviously the bulk dimming to 50% halves, or a little bit more than halves, the energy consumption. So what are the learnings here? Don't use bulk dimming is learning number one. We would definitely not recommend it, including constant light output, because if a light is non-compliant and you're making it lower, then you're increasing that non-compliance. Instead, we'd recommend smart light by light design, The image here is illustrative. So this is a stretch of road, could be any stretch of road in those areas that I mentioned, and is reasonably common in other areas. The height of the columns shows you when the orange bar is fully at the top, it means you should not dim, trim, or include CLO in it. So there's 4 of the lights there that from a smart light by light design, we don't recommend doing any of the smart design. Then there's 3 right in the middle there where you can reduce the light output and still be compliant by up to 80% for dimming. So there's really significant opportunity to get rid of overlighting for those 3. This just shows you that doing a bulk dimming approach is fraught, and smart light by light is the go. As mentioned before, there is around 30 to 40% of energy savings from smart lighting. This is from urban areas. In rural areas, we would expect that to be lower. So, let's say 15 to 20%. Again, this is major roads, not residential areas. Okay, I might just check in. Charlotte, Simone, how did we go in getting the audio working?
We've been talking a little bit via direct message. Simone, how you doing?
No good by the sounds of it.
Can definitely see that Simone's present, but perhaps she's struggling to unmute herself.
Her brand new laptop that she got yesterday is not playing nicely with her headset, is the problem.
Yes. Going completely off script, and I apologize in advance, Simone, I'm going to talk through your slides. It's any errors are my errors, not Simone's. But I think it's really important for everyone on the call to hear what Sunshine Coast is doing. There is contact details for Simone, so please feel free to reach out to her. And there is some excellent material on the Sunshine Coast website around this. Okay, so Sunshine Coast is in the middle of a process to establish or to investigate establishing a dark sky reserve. So dark sky reserves are a really important opportunity for areas to understand what the impacts of artificial light at night and implement policy, practice, and community engagement to reduce those lighting levels. There are quite specific requirements in becoming a dark sky place, including a reserve. This image here is of the current dark sky places. And Selena, feel free to jump in and let me know if there's some additional ones that might not be here. As you can see, a lot of these are in rural and regional areas where it's a lot easier to do this and meet the requirements. There is, however, an urban dark sky place.
At Palm Beach.
Yeah. So this is something that you can see in urban areas as well. And there are different requirements for urban and regional reserve areas. So what is Sunshine Coast proposing to do? Firstly, there's a lot of reasons for Sunshine Coast to consider a dark sky reserve to reduce light pollution. The hinterland in Sunshine Coast is a magnificent and beautiful region. It is also relatively well protected from the more populated areas of the coast by hills. So in terms of its actual geographic position, it's an excellent area. And this is a core focus and a core process to not only look at protecting biodiversity, reducing impacts, it's also about tourism economic development and supporting our local communities, attracting visitors to the region.
Paul, can you hear me now?
Ha
Yay!
ha!
I'm so sorry. I got a new laptop yesterday and there was a few little, restrictions on it. So I think it's sorted.
Well done. Welcome, Simone. I'm excited that you're here. Is there anything you want to recap on, or are you happy to go from here?
Sorry, I didn't get to hear much of that then while I was chatting to IT, but yeah, so we're establishing or looking to establish a proposed dark sky reserve in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. And as Paul mentioned before, there is 6 dark sky places across Australia at the moment, and over 200 across the world. So the purpose of the program is to reduce light pollution and show community efforts to protect our dark skies. So it's a great program and one I'm really enjoying being part of. So we're up to this slide here. So in terms of Sunshine Coast Council's proposal, we're proposing a dark sky reserve in the Sunshine Coast hinterland. So you can see on the screen that the black outline is the Sunshine Coast local government area, and the purpley pink space is the area that we're proposing for a dark sky reserve. So that's in the far western side of our region. It's about 40% of our, or close to 40% of our local government area, and 40% of it is government land. So there's a lot of national park in there, but there also is some rural townships in there as well. So there's around 15,000 residents in that space. So in terms of the initiatives that are underway for council in across the Sunshine Coast more broadly, we're doing a street lighting upgrade to be dark sky friendly as well. Not only within our proposed dark sky reserve area, but also across the region. And the dark sky reserve project is one that they're prioritising as part of the street lighting upgrade. And council received $4 million from the federal government to do that upgrade on Energex street lighting. Another initiative that we're working on is around our marine turtle conservation efforts. So we have a number of beaches along our Sunshine Coast region that have turtles nesting on the beaches, and our environment operations team, in partnership with our transport infrastructure assets team, are doing some great work with shielding streetlights, retrofitting streetlights, implementing some luminaire trails down along the open space areas and car parks along those beaches. So you can see on the screen here some before and after shots of some of the lighting upgrades that have happened in that space there as well. So yeah, some really great work that's happening across the region, not only within the proposed dark sky reserve area. And our transport team's also doing, as Paul mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, policy and planning is really important. So council's got an urban lighting master plan that was adopted a few years ago now, but following on from that, we are developing an electrical and lighting infrastructure manual. And once that's finalised, that'll help with some technical requirements governing lighting infrastructure in our public open space areas. So that will be a great resource for us to have moving forward in protecting our dark skies and reducing light pollution. So, and more recently with the Dark Sky Reserve proposal, under a dark sky application, you need to show commitment to reducing light pollution within your proposed area. So we're looking at some showcase projects across that proposed reserve area to reduce light pollution, show the before and afters as part of a potential future application. So looking at, there's an observatory in the space up there, which is on council land. So looking at lighting in that space, looking at public amenities blocks across that reserve area, public public parks and recreation areas as well as sports grounds facilities. So trying to get a bit of a mix across of public assets so we can showcase that council's committed and show community what can be done to reduce light pollution in that space. So I apologise again, it's a really great project. It's one that has many benefits, not only for conservation, but also health and wellbeing for residents and visitors, astrotourism benefits, but it's really for us protecting the natural asset that is there now for future generations. And our region is a growing region. So we are around 360,000 residents at the moment and looking to hit around 500,000 by 2042. So it is about us being smarter with our lighting more regionally, but also obtaining that international and national recognition for some of the efforts that community and government agencies are doing around smarter lighting. So thank you, Paul. And
thanks, Simone. I'm so pleased you got on at the end. And the other thing I will say about this project, it is a really great example of harnessing community voice. So you really should jump on, even if, well, no matter what lighting project or program you're doing in your council area, there's some excellent ways that Sunshine Coast is communicating and working with their community to really tease out this model appropriately and understand what the balance is. So how to find that balance between conservation, sustainability, and the needs of the community. So well done, Simone. I hope you can stick around for the Q&A and feel free to toss any other questions in there as well. All right, I'm going to whip through the slides again and get back to where we were. All right. We are where we were at the start, which is that this webinar is very close to finished. I mentioned the white paper. In order to get the white paper, and we'd strongly encourage you to have a look at it because there's a lot more examples, there's a lot more detail on what we recommend councils should be doing in delivering a sustainable lighting system across your whole municipality. So jump in there and feel free to start filling out a very short survey, and we will give you a link to the white paper. But in the meantime, we're going to go through Q&A. I do understand if people need to go shortly, but we'll be sticky around till 12:30 if we need to go through all the questions that have come through. All right. I think I will start at the very top and just take my way slowly through. I can see a number of comments from Scott talking about the different colour temperature. I totally agree. CCT is not a great measure. There should be other ways in which we talk about this. And there's various other excellent comments in there around colour temperature, SP ratio, etc. Importantly, this is some of the stuff that should be going into your lighting policies, but it's also some of the things that approval authorities are considering around when approving street lighting, for example. All right, so Lever has asked, is there research around specific times of night that dimming should and shouldn't be applied? So the Australian, Ross has said there that the Australian standard really talks about what is the traffic volume and what is the speed. So you can use the criteria in the Australian standards as long as you have that data to then decide on dimming levels. So moving from one level of the standard to another is allowed under the Australian standards. Scott, you're completely right. Overseas lighting standards are massively different. I think Europe is around 5 times, for residential areas, around 5 times the lighting level of Australia, and I think North America is 4 times. So we're already actually coming from a very strong base in terms of light pollution, which doesn't mean there isn't opportunity to do more. All right, just walking my way through. Michael is asking, do energy savings include energy consumption of the smart technology? Ross has answered. There is additional energy consumption. I think it's around 1 watt or thereabouts, which is typically included.
I just made the comment that yeah, despite that additional energy consumption per light, the broader savings well and truly dwarf from CLO trimming and dimming, dwarf that
Ross,
additional energy consumption.
Can you give us the 1 minute version on smart metering for street lighting?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the latest news on this is that I guess anybody who's done a smart lighting project on unmetered street lighting moment will be aware that if you trim or dim those lights or reduce their energy consumption, while you can claim the actual energy savings and the greenhouse savings, you won't yet see that flow through to your electricity bill because those lights are not metered. There's no way of measuring the reduced energy consumption. However, as part of a broader rule change process, the Australian Energy Market Commission, the AEMC, who oversees the NEM, the East Coast electricity market, is changing the rules to allow for smart lights to be used as meters. So the rule change has been set. All of the underlying back-end changes and to systems and billing systems and infrastructure at networks and retailers and things like that will need to change by mid-2026. So we now have a clear timeline on when you'll be able to get dimming from dollars from dimming, as we like to call it. So that clear timeline's been absent for quite a while, and it's great to have that locked in. That's just been in the last 3 or 4 months that's been locked in. So there's a bit of work to go to make it happen, but it's on the way.
I will just say in different distribution regions, when a smart lighting system that includes metering is available, will vary depending on how organised your local distribution authority is.
And maybe, Paul, the only other thing to mention there is I think we've got guests from WA. Obviously, that's a different network, not the same as the NEM, but we understand that the network, the decision makers over West are watching very closely what the AMC does and what happens over East, and they're likely to follow suit, or that you would expect them to.
Yep. Simone, I've got a question for you. 2-part question. What is the next step for your dark sky reserve? And the second part of it is, what are you doing on the ground? What do you see the changes in council's lighting assets as a result of creating the reserve?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so at the moment we're in phase 2 of the project, which is that phase community engagement program. So we went out to the community in May this year just to seek their thoughts on this proposal and whether they thought it was a good idea. And overwhelmingly 95% of respondents were very supportive of establishing a dark sky place on the Sunshine Coast and protecting what we have there now. In terms of next steps, so we're in that phase at the moment and we're currently preparing the lighting management plan and the technical documentation that's required for a future application. So working through that now. So you need a lighting management plan. You need to have a lighting inventory of your core space within that dark sky area. So you have a core and then you have a buffer, and the minimum size needs to be 700 square kilometres. So our space is close to 800 square kilometres. So you have to have that documentation prepared. So we're working through that at the moment. And I see us, once that's done, that will go back out to the community under another community engagement process to seek their feedback on the lighting management plan and what that says. But I guess our intention would be for council public assets, that we would like to see that we meet specific requirements under Dark Sky Places program. They are advocating for 3000 Kelvin lighting across that space. So we would be looking at that within our public open space areas. We're talking with Energex at the moment around what support they have for the project, as well as Department of Transport and Main Roads. Being such a rural area, there's not a huge amount of street lighting in there, but we see that being, as you said before, Paul, that would be the biggest win for this project, and having evidence to show that you've done that for the street lights would be great as part of an application as well. So, and then as I said previously, next steps will be those showcase projects. So I'd really like to see the Mullaney Observatory change to dark sky friendly. At the moment, I believe they do what Parramatta was considering doing, where you switch off the lights, you get the candles out and you do your stargazing night. But having those lights, retrofitted or upgraded to be dark sky friendly would be a great outcome to share as well. So they're sort of the next steps of the project. And then, 2025, go back up to council, provide them with the draft lighting management plan, the feedback from the community, and seek further direction on whether we submit an application to the program.
Awesome. Thanks, Simone. We have another question on the best council lighting policies. Ross, and I know James and some of the other team are also on the line. What is your recommendation about lighting policies that councils can access?
I can go first. James, jump in if you've got any other thoughts, but there's lots of good examples which we're happy to share. We can send that information around either following by one of the avenues after the webinar, but there are lots that are publicly available. You can Google council public lighting policies or guidelines. We've been involved in quite a few, but they have evolved over time though, and there's much more of a focus in particular in relation to smart lighting and dark skies consideration in more recent public lighting policies. So if they're older than 2 or 3 years, those ones probably are due for a bit of a review and update, which they, for the most part, they usually are. They go through a 3-yearly or a 5-yearly update process. But yeah, we can send some links to some good ones that we'd recommend reading.
Nice, thank you. I did include a screenshot of the Maroondah council policy earlier in the presentation. That is about 4 years old, I think. It's got some really good stuff in there, but I'd strongly recommend grabbing the white paper through that drop form, feedback form, because it's got heaps of really clear and specific information and recommendations as well. From Anita, we have a question around, is there a minimum distance a streetlight should be from a biodiversity corridor to reduce artificial light at night on gliders, frogs, birds, and bats? So I guess firstly, I'll just spend wildlife corridors is a really interesting one. So wildlife corridors are everywhere in cities. They're often along creeks. And during the day, there are pathways for animals to travel. But at night, if there's a bridge over a creek and there's lighting across that bridge, then it can act as a barrier. So it will stop nocturnal animals moving from one side to the other. And as mentioned, 60% of insects, 70% of mammals are nocturnal. So wildlife corridors is a really interesting way that a lot of councils are starting to think about artificial light at night and how do they manage lighting in in those areas. In terms of minimum distance, it's really about spill and design. So you're trying to limit and in fact stop artificial lighting from cutting or stopping the flow of animals along the corridor. And so that means either you're putting shields in, either you're dimming or turning off, or stopping the light from actually being like cutting. Like think about it as a barbed wire fence with the light. So you're trying to break that barrier, trying to break that light so that the flow of animals can go through. So minimum distance is not really the right way to think about it. It's looking at the design of the lights and what the spill and the spread of that light is. Ross or anyone else, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess that the starting point is always you've got to consider whether you need to light at all as well. So your first decision may be we don't put lights in that space. That's the best outcome. There's significant concerns about a particular species. And somebody's Ashish has just put a link up to the National Light Pollution Guidelines for Wildlife. There's some great information in there about all of those impacts that Paul just talked about.
Yeah, that's a super document. Totally recommend people taking it home, reading it in your blue light before you go to bed, so that's flashing before your eyes. It's got some excellent case studies and examples. All right, any other questions or comments from anyone? Otherwise, I think we're heading close to the end. Thanks everyone for coming. Special thanks to Simone and to Ross. We got there in the end, but some great examples, and this is a very, very interesting area. We will keep you all posted on updates through our newsletter or through future webinars, but we're excited about the next 5, 10, 15 years of sustainable lighting, and there's certainly plenty more work to do. So thanks again all, and we will see you at the next one.